diversity and inclusion. Let's see his ways of managing such situations, heightened situations, and you tell me whether or not you think it's racist. Okay. But at the 1964 Democratic National Convention held in Atlantic City, New Jersey, at the NFDP delegates were refused seating, dealing another blow to organizers who had risked their lives to make a change. Okay, some believe that nation's attention to the Freedom Summer garnered for civil rights movement helped convince President Lyndon B. Johnson and Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That I love it how they this History Channel tries to paint Lyndon B. Johnson in a very nice light, but yes, this is not what happened. Okay, so if we do some more researching and we get to this here, this is actually what really happened. So you can take this from the King Institute, Stanford at stanford.edu, or you can take it from here. You tell me, how is it that the History Channel decided to paint Lyndon B. Johnson, who was a Democrat, in such a different light than what the SN, this is a Student National, what is it? I know this stands for, right? Well, we just read it not so long ago, but it's the Student National Convention for Nonviolence, whatever, digital.org. Okay, so we're going to go and read from two different sources what Lyndon B. Johnson, what was his motivations for doing such things, okay? The delegation was hopeful traveling to Atlantic City, and during their first day there, many delegates expressed sympathy for the plight of Black Mississippians. Mrs. Harmer, powerful testimony, which she vividly described her life behind the closed doors of Mississippi's society, brought some to tears. Is this America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, where we had to sleep with our telephones off the hook because our lives be threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings in America? This was under the South rule, under Democrat rule, not Republican, Democrat rule. Okay? But ruthless counteraction by President Lyndon Johnson, seeking a peaceful, non-controversial convention and fearful of a Dixiecrat walkout. He did not want to lose his already racist constituents that pretty much fuel the Democrat Party. He did not want to lose them. So he battered the NFDP supporters. Threats were made against supporters in line for federal appointments, and United Automobile Workers leaders Walter Reuther threatened to withhold money from MLK's SCLC. What is that? Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That is so nice of a Democrat, right? Right? But didn't Malcolm X already warn us about this type of thing? He did. So why are we surprised? Finally, a compromise was announced by the then Minneapolis Attorney General Walter Mondale. Two seats for the MFDP and full seating of the so-called regulars. No discussion had been held with the MFDP about this compromise. The MFDP delegates rejected it after a parade of civil rights leader and other liberal urged acceptance at an intense meeting. So we didn't come all this way for two seats, since all of us is tired. This is Mrs. Harmer. So the so-called regulars, these are the Democrat regulars, okay? They wanted to be, everyone there could be seated. And you can see here, this is the conference. Only 2 seats would be reserved for Black members of the MFDP. That is through, and you can look at this site, has a lot of really good and cool information about our history. I really do wish more Black people get involved in this, but obviously I will never understand why they decided to name themselves Democratic Party, because now it puts this notion that the Democrats were inviting of these individuals when they never were. People have forgotten how cruel they were, and simply by sharing a name and not understanding the history behind these parties and why I still to this I understand why they wanted to use Democratic in the name, but it's too close to that of the Democrat Party to be manipulated in a manner that puts the Democrat Party in such a beautiful light and plight with Blacks trying to obtain, their civil rights and more freedoms. So that's one take on what happened. And this is from the King's Institute, Stanford.edu on this event. Okay. So yeah, this Students Nonviolence Coordination Committee. That's where the last site I just closed. That was the reading that I was giving. Well, the experts of the reading that I was just giving. So, all right. Now we're going to read their version of what happened. So, at the DNC later that month, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Congress of Racial Equality, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the CNCC conducted public and private diplomacies on the MFDP's behalf. In a national television speech before the DNC, which is the Democrat National Committee, Credentials Committee, the MFDP delegate Fannie Lou Hamer spoke passionately about the violence and intimidation suffered by Mississippi Blacks seeking to register to vote, concluding, "If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America." King echoed Hamer's sentiment, telling the committee, "Any party in the world should be proud to have a delegation such as this seated in their midst, for it is in this saints in ordinary walks of life that the true spirit of democracy finds its most profound and abiding expression." Exactly, because this not only capitulated of Blacks, but also whites who came down from the north to help. These were Republican whites, not liberal whites, but and like Dr. Martin Luther King said, if you really truly believe in democracy, this is the party that you would join. You wouldn't want to join the Democrat Party. This is the party that you would join. Obviously, with him saying such profound things like this, I'm hoping now people can understand how the Democrat Party merged what Martin Luther King did and with this party into their party to mask their bigotry, to be honest. Mask their bigotry. We have diversity in our party, so what are you saying? We're not like this, but yet the underlying ideology never really left. It was always there. If we keep going here, President Lyndon Johnson, however, was fearful of losing white Southern votes if the MFDP delegates were seated, and advocated a compromise. So yes, this compromise is something I'm going to talk about when we're going. The next thing I want to talk about, which will be the last thing, is this compromise that Dr. Luther King was trying to propose is something also you can look at it from Nixon's Southern strategy. And there's 2 things I'm going to read for you guys so you understand and get further context of where I'm going with this. So the Credential Committee of the DNC offered to award the MFDP 2 at-large seats to seat members of the all-white delegation who would formally promise to support the DNC's candidate if candidates in the upcoming election rather than campaign for the Republican Party Goldwater, and to bar segregation delegations from the 1968 convention. So hopefully you see what they did here. For the Democrats to keep a hold of their power, they had offered to give 2 seats to blacks and the rest to all whites, and promise that, and hopes and support that should an upcoming election come, they didn't want them to move over to the Republican Party. They didn't want them to, because for the most part, it was primarily still conservative. They still had their old values as far as family, free market. You just couldn't do it now with slaves. You just couldn't do it. So with slaves, so you literally you had to work for your money. You had to build businesses, and at the end of the day, money was their main concern. How they would be able to support their families and all that other stuff. So they had decided to promise to support if they so they would. So rather than campaigning with a Republican and to bar segregated delegations, I get it. So basically this was, oh man, this is really sad. So basically the NFDP settled with a racist, all because he promised to bar segregation delegations from the 1968 convention. And there you have the DEI initiative born. Diversity is only skin deep. It's not thought. It's only skin deep. And you got crumbs. We got crumbs. 2 seats. 2 seats. And that was enough. Although King had told Johnson that he would do everything in my power to urge the MFDP being seated as the only Democratic constitutional delegate from Mississippi, he supported the compromise. MFDP delegates and many civil rights activists, however, were disheartened by the Credential Committee's refusal to seat the MFDP delegates. Hammer's response was, "We didn't come all this way we did not come all this way for only 2 seats, maybe." So I would have been disheartened by that too. Why would King kneel for 2 seats just to have a seat at a table with people who won't even listen to his ideas, who still thought very little of them like they do today? They show it, and they show it with such pride too. It's not like they really hide it. But I love it how they like to say that the party switched, right? And now that you know what the Democrats did in order to keep white Southerners or whatever, we're going to talk about the most controversial thing that the Republicans did. But with all the things that I have, it's been like an hour now that I've talked about this, with all the context that has been given, I hope one can understand the reasoning behind Nixon's strategy when it comes to trying to gain the favor of those on the Democrat Party, or those who are just Southerners, period. When we look at today's society, especially, and I wasn't born back during that time, so I don't know what the makeup of society looked like when it came to behavioral problems and social issues. But one would have to assume they were quite high. when I look at society now, there are a subset group of individuals, no matter what race they are, but in particular, since I'm talking about Black in America, there are a group of individuals on Black America. I would be very weary if I found in my neighborhood, if I had kids going to school with my children. Not only would they be disruptive, they would cause damage. They would be cause like property damage, bullying, retaliation in the form of vengeance for all the just for simply being a different color or talking different. I'll be very weary if certain individuals are allowed to come into my neighborhood, especially if I worked so hard to get out of the hood, get out of the gutter, and into a nice neighborhood, and then the individuals who bring their family and their children, if they're not in a properly mannerized and to society, I'll be very concerned with whether or not I would want my children to go to those schools. And so with the desegregation that the Democrats like to take credit for, like I said, there's been so many civil rights acts that have been passed that Democrats were not on board with, and also some of those Republicans who were put into power by one of the oldest civic organization out there, which is RDO that we had mentioned. They are literally Republican in name only, but they do the bidding of Democrat leaders. We've had the Civil Rights Act that got passed during the Reconstruction era. We had the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which was put on board again by a Republican, but then was later on, I said this before, the longest filibuster in history. Well, the first longest filibuster in history was that by a Democrat named Strom Thurgood, who eventually, when he did join the Republicans, it turned out that he thought, what he thought of Black people was not that bad. He ended up turning a new leaf, but a lot of people don't like to talk about that because it would be interesting to know that the one person who did, switch from the Democrats, actually the Dixiecrats, over to the Republican side because he lost, and the Dixiecrats were no longer around anymore. It turned out this man eventually did, feel compassion for Black people because he thought very wrongly of them. However, he held the longest filibuster for the 1957 Civil Rights. And the only reason why Lyndon B. Johnson gets the credit for it is because, just like with everything, he used us as political pawns. This is just to eradicate and erase and change the Democrats' past, because there was so much conflict with Blacks and whites, Southern whites, who were Democrats when it came to representation and voting. So they made a compromise. This is nothing about actually giving a shit about, Black people. This was his way of appeasing Black people and also trying to not give them too much so that whites can be satisfied. If you actually want to look at it, whites might have been really concerned about their jobs being taken away. Well, one way to deal with that is make sure the government prints out money to give to Black single moms. Then, hey, you won't have to work, and make sure that those Black single moms don't have fathers. And that way you can reassure them that, hey, you won't be in competition with a Black mom, because 9 times out of 10, she will take the money instead of hoping that her husband gets a job, which might be your job. So in a way, he made a compromise that not only helped out his white, men and white families, but also help out Black families. But it helped Black families it did not help Black families. It actually was very detrimental to the Black family. They were programmed to not let men make money in order to support their families, because like I said, he didn't want to take jobs away from whites. Now, with going with that notion, because the Democrats would never ever admit that out loud, Nixon decided to take a playbook from Wallace's chapter, a book from George Wallace, who was a Democrat, a racist Democrat, and I believe he might have been an independent at one point. Maybe he was just independent, but I'm going to I'm going to read on why so many people think that he switched sides. He didn't switch, no, not switch sides, or why they think that the Democrat and Republican Party switched sides due to the Southern strategy. So if you don't know, the Southern strategy was a way for Nixon to somehow win the South, because the South was full of white Democrats, and he needed to see how he can win them over. Okay, so this is going to get a little crazy and interesting at the same time. But it all boils down to the Brown versus education, and something that we still fight to this day. Something that Republicans for a very long time has been wanting: school choice. But who are those who are opposed to school choice? So now people look at school choice now as a great thing. But when this was mentioned back under Nixon, under the Southern strategy, a lot of people who are today looking at it think of this as a way for Nixon to win white voters, which in a way it was. So his logic was this: we know the ruling of Roe versus, not Roe versus Wade, but the board versus education, Department of Education, was going to ruffle a few feathers. Now, instead of desegregating schools and parents having their children go to schools in which they have no choice, why don't we try to appease both? The schools won't be segregated. However, we understand if you do not want to send your child to a school that is desegregated. So instead, we'll impose school choice. A lot of people today look at school choice as a way of slowly making schools become segregated. That's how they viewed it back then. Well, no, that's not how they viewed this back then, but a lot of people today believe that's how they viewed it back then. But in a way, it was, if you actually read some of his excerpts, in which we will. So the Supreme Court 1957 decision in Brown declared that the state's imposed school segregation was unconstitutional, increased the politics of education rather than decrease its importance in school desegregation. This article describes the political activities in schools desegregation after Brown by the two major political parties, Republicans and Democrat. In summary, the Republican Party placed its major activity towards winning Southern votes in order to change the majority in the U.S. Congress, slow down the desegregation process, creating alternative to public school desegregation, such as school choice options, and making conservative appointments to the federal judiciary. The Democrat Party sought to retain its Southern political base by promising an orderly process of implementing the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Brown, providing legal remedies through court with assistance by the Office of the United States, Office of the U.S. Attorney General, and providing financial support to local schools during districts seeking to desegregate their schools. Nevertheless, the conservatives over a 50-year period lost a few struggles but won the political war against court-ordered school desegregation. The national political struggle over school desegregation is discussed in this article, and that struggle continues. Now, the way that, and if you look at how our education system is, the Democrats' approach to everything is money. But see how they put it in such a manner in which they say they're just going to financially support these local schools into basically desegregating. It sounds really good on paper. Of course, will help you with funding your schools into desegregation, right? But if we go back to property taxes, this is where everything is in, the thin lines. Property tax, yeah, you'll get financial help, but through property tax. In areas where property tax was low, that was the financial assistance, whatever that portion would be matched, that would go to the schools. Where if you lived in a really high end area where you paid more in property tax, well, guess what? Your school was better funded. The devil is all in the details. It's really good to sit here and on paper say, yeah, sure, we will provide financial support, but we knew that it was going to be disproportionate. We knew in a way it was going to have some racial tendencies to it too, but the way that they phrased it and made it seem like they are actually doing something good for society, but the devil was all in the details. Schools in poor areas were underfunded, while schools in nice areas were overfunded. Now, the Republicans, that was not their plan. Their plan, yes, they did definitely use some of the fears that Southerners had, as far as like speaking white. Like, okay, I'll read some of this stuff here. Perhaps the never-ending saga of the Confederate flag is low-hanging fruit in a quest to make point about Southern exceptionalism. White racial insensitivity is undoubtedly not unique to the South. As a Southern transplant attended grad school in New Jersey, I still remember the shock of discovering that, one, whites outside the South were not universally racial liberals, and two, Northerners nevertheless made many assumptions about all white Southerners, including me. 7 years at Rutgers University cured me of the telltale Charlotte, North Carolina accent, but it also motivated me to do Southern history, because I was certain that myth and that the desire to exoticize the South had prevented historians from seeking its complexity. I remember feeling compelled to challenge scholarly assumptions about universal white Southerner identification with the Confederacy, and to inform fellow students in the South history seminar that in fact my family never sat around the supper table romanticizing the lost cause or rehashing Civil War battles. It was wrong and perversely ahistorical to assume a direct line of continuity between the 19th and 20th century South. Other aspects of Southern distinctiveness, however, reigned comfortably true for me, especially in recent history. There were no Klan members hidden in my family closet, but it was true that my parents were Nixon-era converts to the Republican Party, motivated in small part by school busing and their sense that Nixon represented the high-class alternative to men like George Wallace and then Democrat Jesse Helms. My folks never advocated integration and they hated busing, but they were good Southern folks with the right raising who had enough sense to be moderate and polite about their demands. So, this is written by someone who is white in his experience, but how Nixon decided to get some of these individuals, he goes on even more. You can read all of this on, I'll put this in the link so you guys can read it. But he, instead of just coming out and saying, which is interesting because he didn't really need to say that, but with being political correct and saying that, hey, like I said before, I know in today's era, there are definitely a subset of people I would not want in my neighborhood. I would not want going to the same school as my child. It's not because I am racist. It's because of what I have observed. Not to say that I can't give people chances, but it really, you can go to some of these places in the hood and see that there are some individuals in the hood or these low income communities where their family are intact. They do teach their children their manners. They do. But how many of them are actually the majority in those neighborhoods? Not that many. Those are the individuals I do want coming to my neighborhood, not the others. So obviously we can't really say that in the political sphere because, well, that's political suicide. So what Nixon had to do was phrase it in a way that white Southerners who were part of the KKK would understand, but also those who were black, who were fortunate enough to have money to go to these charter schools, they could too as well. Obviously, with that being said, you wouldn't have as many, maybe there weren't a lot of blacks back in the day that had a lot of money, but it did slowly slow down the desegregation, in a way. Yes, it was like what the Republicans' approach was, yeah, sure, we will end segregation, but we know it's up. So we're going to make another set of schools so that our education, the potential for our children education does not dwindle and isn't subpar. So that's why we're going to have these things called school choice. If you have the money, then sure, you can be able to go. If you don't have the money, which blacks didn't back then, they wouldn't be able to go. So those who were in the uppity or who were wealthy enough, they could afford to send their children to schools that were probably not that probably had very few blacks in it. And it's not to say that the whites, it's not to say that the whites wouldn't be okay with one or two blacks. What they feared was a whole bunch of them being in there and not being of the same caliber as their children, and it might bring down their kids' education onto a lower level. So let's go on and read more about this guy's experience and what he wrote. So he's like, wrapped up in this narrative of party realignment is the most modern articles of faith behind Southern exceptionalism. There was Republican Southern strategy. Richard Nixon and his advisors, the story goes, stole a page from the Goldwater and Wallace playbook. So if you know who Goldwater is, this is someone that Malcolm X did talk about when it came to Goldwater and Johnson and why he wouldn't vote for either. Wallace was a hardcore racist. George Wallace was one of those who did not care for black people. He wasn't racist towards them, but he was like, hey, I have my shit, you have your shit, let's go our own way. So he picked up a few pages from the Goldwater and Wallace playbook and wooed white Southerner voters into the Republican Party with appeals to festering racial resentments. So he feeded into that notion, that side of the white, races who were displeased with the outcome of Brown versus education. With that being said, is it immoral to try to garnish some of their votes by leaning into their worst, fears? Yes. Did it work? Yes. But then, like I said, we know that there's some individuals out there who don't belong in certain areas. And if you don't want to have them in your areas, I would advise you come up with a second plan where you yourself don't have to necessarily interact with them. You and your people can interact somewhere else and you can still have that cohesion. But they didn't act like Southern segregationists or openly champion white supremacy. See, so these individuals, they were just angry about the outcome of Brown versus education. They weren't segregationists or open white supremacy. They just they were more concerned about their children's education. Rather, the Republicans employed a coded language of states' rights, laws and order, and force busing. So, as Nixon aide John Elkman later described it in Witness to Power, Nixon took strong positions on busing, quotas, and crime, but always couched his views in such a way that a citizen would avoid admitting to himself that he was attracted by a racial appeal. There were, for example, plausible reasons to be against open housing that had nothing to do with the fact that most public housing projects dwellers were minorities. So that's what they offered. And let's be honest, one of the main reason why, I mean, I don't mind living in a neighborhood with black people. My concern about living with a neighborhood that's full of black people is things that have been observed in our society, that they are um, um, I should say the majority of the offenders in that in a certain category. Why would I want to put myself in that predicament? Why would I want to put myself in that situation? And if I were to say it out loud, I might get called a racist, a coon, or all this other stuff. But to simply say that and to acknowledge that there is a problem, so people are going to get offended, and sometimes, I guess, in a lot of ways, you just have to phrase it differently so that others can understand you, or at least come on your side and empathize and sympathize with you without you outright coming out and saying it. Because, well, if you just coming out and saying it, it just seems so much harsher. If you would have said it a different way, people would be a lot more appealing to whatever your options are. So that's what political correctness does. And I don't like it, because people lie. Such disingenuous campaigning, invented by Wallace and perfected by Nixon, some scholars have argued, has kept the white South unapologetic, coming back for more colorblind republicanism every 4 years. So, I like, when you look at school choice now, do you really see it as an unapologetic, a white South version of an unapologetic view of colorblind republicanism coming back every 4 years? The one thing I can say on the Democrat side is that they always use white supremacy, which is interesting because they are the party of white supremacy. They always come around threatening that democracy is going to end and that you're going to go back in chains as slaves, even though they were the ones who are in charge of it. And let's be honest, over the past 2 years, they definitely have lived up to that ideology by locking down individuals. I do think it's crazy how, if we, like, I don't think he needed to say, I don't think, like it says in this chapter in Southern exceptionalism that has recently come under fire. As one historian put it bluntly, the Southern strategy explanation of the political transformation of the modern South is wrong. Moreover, so as co-editor and contributor authors to the 2009 anthology, The Myth of Southern Expansionism, Exceptionalism, Matthew Lassiter and Joseph Caprison argue the notions of the exceptional South has served as a myth, one that has persistently distorted our understanding of American history. Their goal is not to absolve the South, but to implicate the nation. Neither denies the history of racism in the South or its role in Southern-style massive resistance. Rather, both argue that the tendency to associate white racism exclusively with the South, a practice perpetrated by South-centered accounts of the Civil Rights Movement and the Southern strategy accounts of partisan political realignment, has obscured the presence of white racism and racial inflected politics elsewhere in the United States. As they pointed out 2 weeks before President Eisenhower sent the National Guard to protect black students from segregationist mob in Little Rock, Arkansas, the governor of Pennsylvania was forced to dispatch troops to the Philadelphia suburb of Levittown. There, a white mob of 400 people turned out to protest a black family that had just moved in, tormenting them with loud music and car horns, vandalizing their homes, and displaying a Confederate battle flag. Clash between Pennsylvania troopers and residents lasted for a week. Americans remember Little Rock, Arkansas, but not Levittown. The reason Lassiter and Caprison suggest is because history and popular memory have reinforced a selective historical consciousness about the Civil Rights era, which in typical which is typically portrayed as an epic showdown between retrograde South and a progressive nation. In reality, they argue most regional characteristics cited as evidence of different kind are really differences of degree, thus contributing to the myth of the South. Exceptionalism frequently turned their gaze elsewhere, reminding us not only that whites rioted against housing integration in Pennsylvania, but that segregation of the Chinese existed out west, and that the New York prisons could be brutal as Mississippi notorious Parchment Farm. Okay, so I told that, like, it's not, this whole entire thing is not black and white. With all of this being said, I still would like to believe that most blacks would never vote for Democrat, knowing their history, but it has been overshadowed by the things they have tried to change in order to make themselves be reflected in a better light. The underlyings of that party has never left. And I have said many, many, many times, the Republicans never claim to be the party for the people. They've never claimed to be there to be there to help you out once they freed you from captivity as a slave. That was not their goal. Their goal was to keep the United States together. And unfortunately, slavery, which was fueling the South economy, was making the South very bolden in their quest to leave the Union. And in fact, it was the Democrats or the Confederates who fired the first shot at Fort Sumter that started the Civil War. So obviously the Union soldiers were in no hurry to actually free blacks. They were just waiting for the catalyst that would spark a Civil War. It was more like, just give me one reason to start this fight, and the Confederates did. So I hope that more blacks can, if you were able to stay through this whole entire thing, great. I definitely wouldn't say watch me. You can I would put some of these links on the bottom, or at least the really important ones. And I would just urge you to do more research for yourself. The first blacks were Republican, but that's because Republicans just gave you the means to free yourselves. But then after that, your quest in life was determined up to you. That has not been the case with Democrats. They are only there to say that you can't do anything without us. And their version of helping you is not going to be the same version of how they help themselves and the people who are white, who are in their, or just in their circles. They're not going to help the mass like they help their elite friends. You're not going to be on the same level as them, but yet they will promise you the world that you will be. That is the difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. And like Malcolm X even said, if you are black and you vote Democrat, you are a traitor to your race. I 100% agree with that. I would say, I wouldn't tell you to be Malcolm X also said, I wouldn't tell a man to be a Republican. I wouldn't tell a man to be a Democrat. I'll tell him just think for himself. So if I were you, I would definitely be an independent. I'm an independent, and I make my decisions on who I vote for, on what they offer and how they speak. Sometimes there are things that we observe in our society that people are too afraid to say. But when someone puts a policy in to curtail some behaviors that are very detrimental, even if it does seem like it's a little bit racially motivated, then hey, I'm going to go along on that side. And what I mean by that, hey, if there's a whole bunch of black people doing crime and they're not getting punished, whatever policy you put in place that will make crime, will deter crime for everybody, I'm in it. If it happens to be the only reason why we are putting that policy in place is because there's too much crime being committed by blacks, and you want to call it racially motivated, then the only way you can fix that is to change your culture, to change how people observe what your behavior in society. And if your behavior in society warrants that, y'all need to be dealt with. Don't get mad when policies are passed to make sure you are dealt with. So that's just my opinion in all of this. Thanks for listening. I just had to like I said, I couldn't really sit for the whole entire movie of Emmett Till, because it really upset me, not only from the standpoint of how has the Democrats changed their persona about themselves, and how they are presented in the mass. How were they able to change that without anybody knowing, thinking that all the stuff that was racially motivated and done in the past was all done by Republicans? That is something I find egregious. And then on top of that, one last thing, you guys, I'm sorry about this, but this is what really upset me when I was reading and researching more into this. The Democrats, till this day, still, in order to say that they are for Black rights, that these people are wolves. President Joe Biden we haven't had lynching when and how long? This is something that no one does. Why did you have to pass this? You didn't have to pass this. This was still be, if someone gets lynched, guess what? That's considered murder. Someone doesn't just lynch someone out of the blue. That is first degree murder. That's premeditated murder. To sit here and think that you're doing something nice for us. You have the Emmett Till Commission. I'm sorry, well, not that part. The Sumner County Courthouse was restored and included the Emmett Till's Interpretive Center. 51 sites in the Mississippi Delta are memorized as an association with Till. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act and American law, which made lynching a federal hate crime, was signed into law on March 29, 2002 by President Joe Biden. It's like they are trying so hard to just change the narrative of their past behavior. This is something you will never get away from. And as long as I'm alive, I will continue to voice. I will continue to spread the truth about, including Joe Biden, a person who has been who started his whole career off being a segregationalist, being a racist. Till this day, he has said the most racist things about Black people, and he never gets any repercussions at all for the things he has said and the things that he has done. So I will continue to educate those who are willing to listen, to not be blinded by those who speak nice words and have a silver tongue. Do your research. Understand the difference between those who are wolves and those who are foxes. Not to say that you should, and basically don't trust either one. Make the decision for yourself. There are going to be individuals who are in high places and low places that you need in your life, but please be careful. The wolf tells you who he is. The fox does not. Thank you for listening, and I'm so tired now, but like I said, that movie made me really upset, and I really do hope Black America come together and understand that we're stronger when we're together. We don't have to sacrifice each other just so one of us can survive, one of us can have a family, one of us can thrive. No, we all can thrive. Let's do something different. Let's start adopting some of these notions and some of these characteristics that other races and ethnicities in our societies have adopted, because they stay together. Jews stay together. Muslims stay together. Chinese stay together. Whites, for the most part, stay together. Latinos stay together. Blacks, on the other hand, we're the only ones who have been manipulated in this manner. We can do better. Bye. Have a nice night. I'm definitely going to go to sleep now.